Thank you for listening to the Allender Center Podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Rachael Clinton Chen. We've got really good news, don't we? And I will speak for myself. The good news so supersedes all other news that it's just good. But I also admit on the side that there is some sad news, at least for me and for many of our listeners. So let's start. I think it's one of those, let's start with some extraordinary good news, which, as I said, will cause anything that brings loss, it will become opaque in the translucent goodness that is about to be spoken. So anyway, good to be with you, Rachael.
Good to be with you, Dan. You just want me to share my news?
Is there any other way to do this other than to go? We're in a transitional period now. We can also argue that the entire pandemic has been one wicked transitional period from almost one episode to the next. But this feels like such good news that people are like, I think they already know, don't they?
The good news is that my husband and I are expecting a baby girl sometime in mid-August. So we are, at the time of this conversation, well into our third trimester and counting down our days. So Wow. It is a very, very joyous season. One long hoped for, anticipated, labored for, waited for, and we are over the moon, and our boys are over the moon. So
good news. Again, I will say in my rather self-indulgent self-orientedness, that has some consequences that we want to acknowledge right from the beginning. And that is, as much as you have urged us to continue working up to the day of your birth and then the next day starting over, we've been insisting that you take your...
Yeah.
Is that... Did I put it well?
I don't know about that, but I mean, someone did ask me recently, when are you going on maternity leave? And I was like, when the baby comes. And then I've had to actually repent and do some thinking about what that might actually look like. So.
Well, we'll talk about the implications a little later, other than to say that I am going to lose my beloved, intrepid co-host for probably 6 months. Though I think it will be fair to say that you'll need to come on at least
no
kind of then I'll be at least in the reporting stage of
See, you got these ones. What Dan is trying to say is, when I have my baby, I am going on maternity leave. And that is not happening until hopefully August, but you never know. And I will return, but I am not going to be joining him as a co-host anytime during that leave.
All right. So it was one last effort. And the answer is no. And I fully accept it, of course, and bless it. But before we go much further into some of the implications, I just to begin, what we really want to cover is what you have learned, what you're learning about what it means to be a mother. You have 2 stepsons, and it has been a glorious, as it always would be, with sons or daughters, a glorious, difficult, beautiful process. And you've done a lot of learning, a lot of growing as to what it means to be a mom. But I'd also add that your presence in the world has often been deeply attuned and containing. In other words, you're a woman You're a person who has created incredible attachment and to our audience as well. I know that from many of our listeners. So I do want to talk about mothering and how you mother, what you've learned about mothering, and what you're anticipating in the expectation of what's ahead as a mother. So start with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think one thing I want to lead with is I am so aware, even for myself, and I'll talk more about this as we get into the conversation. This is just such tender, tender, tender ground. I think for any woman, just mothering, like the word mother, the multitude of stories, hopes, losses, heartaches, joys that our bodies and our hearts hold, sometimes in a really multidimensional way, even with just one story, one life, our relationships with our mothers. Like this is such tender ground. And so I think even to step into this conversation, I just am so aware of the multitude of stories that come into the space, even just with the word mother. And so to me, I feel like, I have been mothering for a long time. And I think that's something that's just really important to name, that yes, there is something particular and beautiful and powerful and holy about birthing a child into this world and mothering in a very biological way. And there are so many other ways that we mother that often go so like unseen and just not honored as well. And that doesn't at all take away from this experience for me. But, I knew what it was like. I've just known different kinds of loss of mothering and the desire to mother. For example, being single for 37 years, that ambiguous loss that is hard to talk about, of like not being a mother because of circumstance, quote unquote, well, as my 12 and 10-year-olds say, technically. Everything's so technical. That's a mothering thing, how to have ego strength when young people are telling you you're technically not right and haven't learned inference. Side note, something we're working on in our home constantly. And I'm constantly working on my own ego strength to not be like, well, technically this, and this. I think for me, that capacity, like I often have said, good pastors, good shepherds are actually good mothers. Yes, good fathers, but I would say like maybe even more so like good mothers, like offering that sense of attunement and containment, a capacity to repair, and being able to create an environment of flourishing. And again, these are categories that, cross over. I think we also, in our journey for this little one, we lost a baby a year ago. So also having had the experience of a miscarriage. And I mean, there's so much more I could say about that, the way it's talked about, the way it's not talked about, the way it's understood, the way it's not understood, how long of a process that is. I think there's other ways many of us have like been mothering from like really young ages, whether we wanted to or not. And like, so some of those like being good mother skills that you like are grateful for when they can be redeemed, but also have been like really costly in what you've what's been demanded or required, or even I think for me, that's been such a growth edge in my work with the Allender Center, learning when it's appropriate and good and right to bring these parts of myself, and when it's appropriate and good and right to step back and let other people hold and let other people pastor and all those good things. So when I think about mothering, and obviously, yes, becoming a step parent is such a particular kind of mothering. And that's also another podcast episode, one that's just such a privilege and such a joy, and also comes with like a deep understanding of your place and that your kiddos already have a mom and you're kind of like a bonus mom, and learning all those boundaries. And, so, I mean, there's just, this to me is a realm, in some ways, I've thought about so long, and in other ways, because of the heartache of longing to be a certain kind of mother, it's also a space I think I just shut out for so long, because it started to feel like that's probably not going to be a possibility for me. And I was definitely, my dream was to, I'm Italian. I come from big Italian families. Like, my dream was to have I'm going to say this now. My dream was to have 8 kids in college. Now, the older I got, the more I understood money, limitations on energy. I was like, okay, maybe that is not a bad dream, but maybe not my dream. And so I think there's, even in this experience, there's still that reality of in these places of just being human and doing things that are at once so ordinary and yet so extraordinary. There's always such a sisterhood of joy and sorrow.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know how to summarize, and I shouldn't even attempt, but what I've just heard is this is one freaking complicated calling.
Yeah.
Not only do we have mothers that we may have such a dear sense of goodness, but also many of us have far more a sense of dread and heartache with regard, or some intersection of both worlds of dear and dreaded. And then to think particularly what it means to be a mother. One doesn't have to have children to be a good mother.
That's
and
right.
you, as I have said, you have been a good mother to the, shall we say, the entourage of the Allender Center. And in that, I have known you to be a good mother to me, a good friend, a good colleague, but also a good mother. And in that, it does hold a kind of, the hats change. They're not all the same. They don't actually maybe even look like hats at times. But then to be a stepmother versus now to be biologically coming to a point of birthing a child from your own body. So I let me just step back and say, in the essence of what you see your own being to be as a mother before even having stepsons or your own biological child, what has it been to be a good mother? And you have been a good mother for a long, long season. I'd just love for you to try and put a few words to what you see that to actually look like and be on behalf of others.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I'm in we're in a birthing class right now, and it's actually like a mindfulness birthing class. And so it's all about how do you stay present in the moment to what is. And it's had me thinking about, I was joking with the birthing class that I actually thought I was a really good mother and really mature and really grounded until I stepped into marriage and being a step parent and kind of had an instant family, because it's really easy to be, I think I've said this on the podcast before, it's really easy to be grounded and aware and mature and kind of be able to come back with, helpful responses when you have a week to ponder why you had a certain reaction because you live alone and you have a lot of space, than when things are just happening in real time. You lose a lot of maturity when things are happening in real time. And you still don't have a lot of space to ponder, why did I react that way? And you do eventually, just not in the moment always. So in this season, I would say being a good mother is having the ego strength and capacity to just constantly repair when you react in ways that, although make really good sense, and you can be totally understand why I did that, maybe not the best way to handle this situation. Or maybe, there's another human being I'm interacting with and they have their own story and they have their own triggers, and all of a sudden we're having this collision. So when I think about being a good mother, I think about, first of all, and I think about just the work and labor it takes to know yourself. And And I think as women, especially in our world, that's not necessarily something that comes easy for us socially. It's not a part of the system we're in. It's something we have to fight for, something we have to like really lean into, like reach out to communities, seek out resources. So I think that capacity to know something of your own story, to know who you are, to know how you are really, because I'm a fairly neurotic person. And, you know, in our home, they joke like all the time, like my sister asked my stepsons, you know, when you think of Rachael, like, what's like something you like, what's words that come to mind? And both of them at the same time were like, no, 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 no. And we all laughed because obviously the fact they could say that meant they felt secure enough to be able to like play with me in that way. And there's a total truth to it. Like I am the safety first, like, don't do that. Be careful. You know, no, that's not good. Don't dance while you're eating. You could choke. So, you know, it's like,
that's
I know,
hilarious.
but it's like
Wait
real.
a minute. I've never heard that. Seriously? You've said don't
yes,
eat now?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, because our 10-year-old is one of those kids who's just got so much fire and passion in his body. So he'll take a huge bite of food and then he'll get up and do like karate moves and dances and spin around, but he's got like all this food in his mouth and all I can think is he's going to choke. And so I literally
I just have to ask, has he ever choked?
No.
Okay. So you have what we'll call a proleptic sense of disaster.
Yes, I do.
Like you can configure disaster out of, shall we say, a benevolent white cloud passing by
Yes.
a fully blue sky.
This is what I'm trying to say, because lest anyone think like, oh, Rachael, she's so zen. And, you know, being a good mother means you just always have the, you know, like a calm. It's like, no, being a good mother means look, what you bring to the table. And you don't, it's not that like then all of a sudden I'm like, all right, I'm going to be anti myself and somehow become someone who's not worried. Like that's just not reality. And so that's what I'm trying to say is like, one, know thyself. But I do think beyond that, you know, we use this word attunement, but really it just means paying attention. Like paying attention, like actually knowing someone and letting them be a separate self that's different than you, that might think differently than you, that might relate differently than you, trying to make sense of what that is. And I think any person who works with people in general or works with children in general, you would know there's no rule book for that because every little person is different and how they do those things. So what works for one kid, you think, oh, I'm just going to try this again. Doesn't work at all. Like doesn't compute. And then again, that's, you know, honor. I think a lot about honor. What does it mean to bless? What does it mean to honor people? What does it mean to call out their goodness? What does it mean to provide boundaries and honesty in the places where, you know, choices are being made that are going to lead to harm, and to get to be really curious as to what's at play. But again, I think I would just come back to say blessing, honor, knowing someone, celebrating them, delighting in them, but also repairing, knowing how to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, what I would add is that what I know of you is there is a ferocity of goodness, a kind of almost defiance of I will bring, in spite of the complexity, in spite of all the confounding matters, I will bring blessing and goodness into your world. And even your resistance, for whatever number of reasons, I will not intrude in a sense of demand, but I will not easily back off from being able to bring something of flourishing and goodness back to what our dear friend Linda Royster refers to as the shalom of a kind of blessing that creates flourishing goodness. So that, along with the fact that, you know, if I had to say, did you, Did we mention gender yet? Did you?
Yes, I said we're having a baby
Okay,
girl.
I'm okay. Got that. So, given that I'm not going to ask you what names you've chosen,
I won't tell
that
you.
would be, of course. So, for lack of a better way, I'm going to call her little Danny or Danielle.
No. No. See, part of being a good mother is being a fierce protector. So
of time and naming minimally. So the name to be revealed, her presence in your body. What is it? What have you learned so far about this sweet child?
It's really interesting because so much of preparing for so much of pregnancy, honestly, is just terror and discomfort because at every turn, especially if you've known loss and especially if you've known trauma and, you don't necessarily have that innocence that everything just works out. So in some ways, it has actually been a labor to stay present in the moments and to just try to breathe deeply. And it's taken a lot of EMDR and support and reaching out and talking with my midwives at every stage. So I think it feels sweet to feel like I have some sense of her because it's taken a lot of labor to not just want to rush to the end and to let this season of growth and development unfold as it's meant to, but something that, I think Michael and I both sensed from the beginning is that she's just very full of life. And that feels like a grace from God. And it's interesting, even doing this podcast, I can feel the parts of me that are you are putting this out there so publicly. Now loss is going to come and you're going to have to come back and publicly talk about that. So I just want to name that's there with me, but she's so full of life. And I know a lot of babies in utero are, but when we got a 12-week ultrasound, she was bouncing in the womb. She was on a little trampoline, and then her midwife was laughing. They definitely move. They kind of jerk. They do things, but I don't know if I've ever seen a baby rhythmically bounce. She is. My primary care physician was talking with me and just said, something that's important when you think about your birth plan, because that's something that, you have to kind of think about, how do you want to do this thing, is just that you don't really know how it's going to go because this little human being has a way they want to be born. And it's not that they're just at the mercy of you. And I think there's something really true. Whether I can say, oh, these characteristics are true of her, I do have the very strong sense she is her own person. And I think she's very fierce. She's very strong. She kicks real hard and punches real hard. And I mean that she's coming into a very fierce, strong family full of a lot of intense people. So I kind of feel there's something of that there, but that liveliness. And, one of our favorite things about her was when we did our 20-week anatomy scan, she just evaded at every turn. And at first I thought, oh, it's just coincidence. But by an hour and a half later, when they still were trying to just get a peek at her heart or her kidneys or her hands, and she would just constantly just cover the area they were trying to look at the exact moment, even though they kept switching up the order. They want to look at her hand and she'd put up a fist, and they want to look at her profile and she'd turn her head away. And I just thought, there has to be some mystery. There has to be some mystery to this. So whether that has deep meaning or not, there was something, even though
wait a minute. Don't go that direction. An hour and a half of attempting to get data where every single moment that they're moving that form of a stethoscope around your pregnant belly, I think is a little bit more than coincidence. And so what we can say is, this child is rising out of the soil of your very being and character. And, Rousseau populated the world with the idea of a child is born tabula rasa, a unmarked slate that we shape entirely on the basis of how we parent or educate. And the data certainly over like a lifetime, like a few millennia, but nonetheless over the last 20, 30 years, is that a child is, even in intrauterine life, listening to your voice, responding to some degree to your own stress and the complications, but also the benefits, that without stress, there isn't an engagement. So you are hosting in and through your own body a character like and different than you. And I mean, is that a fair way to begin?
I mean, I definitely think so. I laugh because there are things she does that really remind me of Michael. Like, you know, she'll be kicking. I'll have my hand on my belly. I'll be like, Michael, you got to feel this. The instant he touches my tummy, she stops. Like, just goes silent. And whether it's because it's soothing but there's something very playful. And he is definitely someone that's like, I will not perform for you. I won't be exploited by you. So there's these funny interactions we have that just feel like, is that intentional? Like, is she, like, does she really sense that, like, I'm trying to get you to have this experience? And then she's like, no, I'm just going to be quiet now. And then he'll take his hand off almost instantly as soon as the hand goes away. So, you know, there is such a mystery, and I think just a deep curiosity for us as to who she will be. And it's really sweet and special to be doing that when you have like a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old who also have been in a over decade long process of becoming, and, you know, just who they are is so distinct and different and connected, and also, yeah, like their own people, their own person. So I think we're all very excited to get to know her.
Well, again, one of the things that I would underscore as the gift of a good mother is somebody who reads you well, but reads you in a way in which there is always room for vastly more knowledge, more understanding. And that holds a certain degree of paradox. To be read well and I know you. On the other hand, I know I don't know you. Mm-hmm. And that openness to being surprised, to having new revelation, shape a new understanding, not just through developmental sequences, but a sense that even in the womb, you both are studying her, learning how to engage her with a sense of, we know something about how she engages, but we also know there's so much more. And that openness, but confidence, openness, and the intersection between those two, I certainly have seen in your engagement with me and others. So when you think about where you are going to be surprised, where your own neurotic processes that you described earlier are going to be disrupted, have you begun to think a little bit about what the future holds?
Yes, because you can't be someone who finds an impending disaster in a beautiful white cloud and not be thinking a lot about all the potential pathways of the future. So yes, I was joking with my midwife. I mean, I also think it's part of being 40. Like, this is not my first rodeo. It's my first rodeo in this body, but it's, you know, I've journeyed with many friends and family through this kind of baptism and threshold. So yeah, I've thought a lot about, that's why I'm taking a mindfulness birthing class, because they're like, these skills will help you well into the future, you know, when you're constantly at your margin. I mean, have a good friend who had twins a little over a year ago. And she was like, the newborn phase was great, but it's like now that they're walking and like moving and like throwing food, like I really feel like I'm losing it. And, Michael just laughed and said, yeah, if you're not used to being like constantly disrespected at every turn, that will certainly push you past your margins. So, I mean, I think about these things a lot, and it's where I feel a lot of gratitude. I mean, you might have to check in with me 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. It's where I feel a lot of gratitude for, I think, the amount of grace I've cultivated for my neuroses and the skills I've been given and have cultivated around how to soothe, how to like hold that kind of complexity, because absolutely, Michael and I were talking about what we're most afraid of. And for him, it was throwing his back out, which definitely revealed our age, because I was like, you're worried about throwing your back out, but he's done this before. So he's remembering how often you're bending over. And I said, I'm scared of the moments where no matter how much you attune, no matter how much you think you know, you can't offer the soothing you want to. You can't protect in the ways you want to. And how that, I think, will just spike my cortisol to levels of unending degree. And, so I think in the early days when a baby's crying and you're trying to figure out what is it that you need, and they can't speak to you with words, and you're still learning, and just how scary that will be. So yeah, I think about a lot of things, but I also am like, that's part of the adventure. It's part of what I love about working with people. It's part of what I love about doing healing work. It's part of what I love about pastoring. That there is it's like you're talking about a good mother, sees and knows deeply, and also leaves curiosity and room that you don't know. And I think that's really what love is. Is knowing and not knowing.
We don't have much time, so let me just be blunt here. Given your sports consumption, is that a fair word? Consumption, addiction.
I don't know if I'd call it
idolatry.
I don't have a lot of time in these days to just be like watching sports all the time. So no, I reject your words.
But it's built deeply into your very being, is it not?
Yeah.
So, given that you grew up in a particular world and have a strong sense of loyalty to certain teams, let's say in the state of Oklahoma, and your husband, as a Philadelphia-bound sports aficionado, how will your daughter be brought into the world of play?
That again, you have to honor people's personhood. So you can you can help them see how like your team is clearly the best team, and they have to follow. I mean, I think with sports, like you have to have your own love affair. Like you have to have your own adoption of like, I feel a connection to this team. You can't force that. So, I mean, I feel like, I don't know. I'm a little outnumbered here in Philadelphia. I've got 3 Eagles fans in my home. So I'm trying to prepare myself. I mean, Michael did ask me, I have a very serious question for you. And I was really scared. And he said, would you be willing to become an Eagles fan for our baby? And I was like, this is manipulation of the highest degree. And I'm going to have to say, I'm
where did
still
that go?
a Seahawks fan. No, I said, listen, Seahawks are still my top team. And I don't know if that's ever going to get like, what's the word? Dismantled, deconstructed. But I am open to becoming hospitable to the Eagles.
Okay. So a moderately serious question, and then a little bit more before we end. So if Becky and I, get unnamed little Danielle,
Oh my goodness.
a Seahawks onesie, that will not be like too offensive.
No.
Too good. All right. So the other side to this is, what's your sense of what this daughter is going to invite you in to play?
Well, I mean, already I think a deeper embrace of the unknown. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say. And getting over myself and I feel like I've had to let go of my ways of needing like a plan that actually has been disrupted in really wholly good ways over the past several decades. But, I think like any child, she will invite, and I've seen this with my stepsons as well, an invitation to be present in ways that will disrupt my loyalties to work, to cleanliness, to order, to, being able to anticipate people's needs ahead of time so that you can like preempt, anything. So I do feel like there will be an invitation to a different kind of priestly tending, especially in these early years. That will be very disruptive to ways I've ordered my world, to ways I make sense of the world and myself, to ways already we're like, all right, what are the things we won't be able to do for a long season? But I think any openness to another human being and to being loved by them and to loving them changes you.
Yeah.
So,
well, I like many adultified children, the two things that I think my children, my grandchildren have invited me into that I'm not sure I would have ever known the way I know now. And not to say I know it well, but innocence. I did not have, in many ways, the privilege of a long season of innocence, nor did I have the opportunity to, in one sense, be a child. An adultified child having to parent a parent often leaves you in a position where you have to be wiser, stronger, and more adept than your body or your mind or your soul has the capacity. So you end up, at least in my case, feeling like a constant imposter. I have to be older. I'm not. I have to be better, stronger. I'm not. But I have to appear to be. And that is a ruination of any sense of the integrity of being young, which is another word for the word innocence. And what I would wish for you, having been something of an adultified child, that you would, in one sense, have a renaissance of innocence and play. And that's why we will hold, particularly the first 6 months, sacrosanct, even with my putative effort to get you back on for 5 minutes. I think I would have had enough integrity to have resisted that at a later point. But that's my wish. And I think on behalf of our audience, if you would let me pray for you and for Michael and for this little one, as well as your sons, we are going to miss you. It really will be hard, for at least for me, to not have that pleasure of interacting with you on this weekly. On the other hand, such good news that easily can be celebrated even with the anticipation of you returning.
Thank you, Dan.
So Jesus, We thank you for Rachael and her goodness. We thank you for Michael and for their family and for their sons and for this little one. Oh, Jesus, we pray that she will transform this family as she already has and will continue to do so. And we simply pray for a glorious birth and for safety and such a measure of your protection and provision. But again, we pray that there would be joy through this process, the kind of joy that leads again to the humility of knowing that we have so much more to know than what we know. And yet what we do know is something of your goodness. And so we pray that goodness over this family and for all of us who are so indebted to Rachael for her life, for her love, for her mothering, and her goodness. We pray that in your name, Jesus. Amen. Well, my friend, thank you.
Thank you.
And it sounds almost a little too perfunctory, but have a great birth.
Thank you. See you on the other side.
The Allender Center Podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.